This talk will take a closer look at anything as a service, but we'll do it in a roundabout way. We're not going close. We'll back off and make connections across different ideas. And the hope is that when you overlay a concept on top of the other, you could take a closer look at things that are covered and things that stick out. And if you think about those, maybe you'll get a sharper understanding of the concept itself, which lies behind. Like all models are wrong, but some are useful. And if some of them are useful, you could try it out. So basically, at the end of the talk, you'll have some set of frames, some lenses to look through at the idea of anything as a service. But if not, it's just you can think of it like idea wrap, because we are just assembling ideas that rhyme together. Just a bit of fun to close out the day, I guess. So we'll begin with sliced bread. Sliced bread is supposed to be like one of these great innovations in the market. And I think anything as a service is kind of like sliced bread, because you are slicing up usage and the associated payments over time. It's not just payment, because then that would be just EMI, but it's associated payments for the sliced up usage. And this idea of slicing to me rhymes with bundling, not just literally. And so you must have seen this quote if you've been in the software business for some time, about there being only two ways to make money, bundling and unbundling. So this is kind of like that, right? You're slicing up what the usage and payments over time, and this is kind of like a cyclical thing, is what. So if earlier you had unsliced bread, then you go to sliced bread, and once buying slices of bread is too cumbersome, you package it back into however we buy it today. Excuse me. So it's kind of like a yin and yang thing, right? So, and if it is like a yin and yang thing, there are a couple of things that fall out from that. One is that there has to be some force which drives this cyclical thing. And to me, that seems to be like transaction costs, right? Like so cable TV was unbundled by streaming services, like all these examples that we've been hearing so far, like Netflix, Amazon, things like that. But now we have so many streaming services that we might actually like to have a bundle of them and pay less for that. An example of this would be like Mac apps and Set app, right? Like it's basically a bundle of subscription apps. Another fallout of the same yin and yang thing would be that if you have one, if XaaS is going in one direction, you should have something else in the other direction. And my thought is that it's probably productized services. Like if you're going from the neatly packaged product and into a more amorphous like service, and productized service is going the other way around. And also, if it is a yin and yang thing, there have to be like earlier instances of it, and it's not really tied to a digital technology sort of a thing. And sure enough, at least half a century ago, Xerox offered copies as a service. Rolls-Royce offered turbine hours as a service. And similar idea, but bit more closer to home. A lot of us stay in rented houses, and that is basically house as a service. So I mean, these are very like old models, which is basically anything as a service. Right? And cars as a service, we already heard about it, but you can think of it like spanning this evolution of tech, right? Like you could think of hitchhiking is basically cars as a service, and then it goes to cabs, taxi cabs, without the digital tech and apps which allowed it to scale like we know today. We hear a lot about gig economies, freelancing, and freelancing is basically employee as a service. And brain trust is kind of like a new innovation in this field. It's a decentralized autonomous organization. So this is like a similar idea that from the last slide, right? It's a technological evolution. So here you have freelancing as mercenaries, and then here you have the latest tech of blockchain and DAOs and decentralized ownership of the platform and things like that. And this decentralization is a keyword here. you could think of it like another duality which goes along with bundling and unbundling. And since we're talking about blockchain 2 is kind of unbundling. Like it's trust as a service. You're basically trust of an institution as a service, because you're breaking it down and throwing it over the network. And if you look at how these blockchains are represented, it's a lot of times it is this network thing, which leads me to the third duality, which I think goes along with bundling and unbundling. That is hierarchy and the network. And you can think of top-down hierarchies, and you can think of networks which basically don't have a direction. It's just a network of connected nodes. So if you think if you think about this, anything as a service, a networked market, it would probably look like this, as opposed to a traditional market ecosystem that looks like this. It's not that they don't transact amongst each other, but the transactions are so short-lived that we could think of it as separate entities, right? And if you picture your ecosystem or your economy in this way, the way you think about the borders of your org might also, it might also help if you change how you think about it. Like legally speaking, this might be your organization, but if this org goes offline, if you cannot function, maybe notionally you should think about your mathematically speaking, that would be your subgraph. Maybe notionally you should think about your subgraph as your circle of concern, kind of. So this idea of networks is quite fascinating in a lot of different ways. You could, like from a very purely economic standpoint, there are some of these ideas in different books and essays, like this Why Information Grows. The author talks about how information and know-how is accumulated a lot more in networks rather than nodes. Rhymes with this classic essay, I Pencil, which brings attention to the fact that no one really knows how to make a pencil. Like there's no single person who can mine graphite, cut wood, shape rubber, shape the steel, and so on. But the network doesn't break a sweat when making the pencil. So the simplest thing might require a whole network to process something, create something. A similar idea that Hayek talks about in this particular book, where he talks about how knowledge is really dispersed across the economy, and price as the mechanism to.
It doesn't matter now. Tomorrow is the weekend starts tomorrow. So.
Yeah. Also, from a network structure point of view, you could think of like you can have, it might have implications about how you think about the health of your ecosystem, or how you want to bring it down, or how you want to accumulate power there, right? So an example here, this happened 6 years ago in March of 2016. This little package was taken off NPM, a small JavaScript package, just 11 lines of code, but it created all sorts of mayhem, because a lot of other packages depended on it for no good reason, basically, because it was just one function of 11 lines length. But so what we're saying is the functionality was not important in the network that we had, but that a lot of the network structure itself, like a lot of people depended on it, so a lot of sites went down. Another example from a little further back in time, this is the network of Florentine families connected by marital links. And so the idea is these families like Strozi's and all had a lot of wealth and had a lot of seats in the legislature and so on. But we all know about how Medici's were the eventual ones who gain all the power and wealth. Right? So the mathematical reasoning that is given for this is that if you look at the network structure, Medici's have a high betweenness centrality, which is basically a metric that is used in graph theory, right? So in the specific example, what it means is if two families were to broker a deal and were looking for a shortest path across, at least in 50% of the cases, they had to go through Medici's, and that's how they gain their wealth. Little more closer in time, this also has implications for the security of a nation, probably, because this is kind of an example, like a depiction of how Russia, like how you wanted to retaliate against Russia by taking them off the SWIFT network for the banking transactions. So networks, like interesting in those in mathematical senses and these economic parameters. So in that sense, we all have heard of too big to fail, but maybe we need to consider what is too central to fail to, because that might not be the same thing. And since we're talking about networks, we can consider the case of communication networks for a slight detour. Like this, you can think of two people communicating across a channel, and the message goes through over time. It just so this is time 0, and this is the eventual time. So it goes across the tube. This could be like a phone conversation, but this is inefficient because all of this space is wasted, right? So that's the idea of multiplexing, basically. So you're slicing up, like you see, we repeat the idea of slicing here. So you slice up this message into clean little packets, and then you can efficiently use all of this space. And that's the idea of multiplexing. And that's why you could have a lot more communications if you're using instant messaging than phone calls. But this is only possible if you slice up the messages and you like respect this slicing up thing, because it is very easy to say just hi and wait, and that essentially is you trying to convert it into a synchronous hotline and giving up all the benefits of multiplexing. Right? So if you look at the slicing idea itself, it seems like the market environment is affecting your product architecture, right? Because if you have this traditional sort of economy which is creating boxes like this, in a networked sort of economy, you are probably like cutting this up into little cubes too. And so that is, let's call it the law of requisite variety. There is a law in cybernetics which goes by the name. And so if you are operating in a very complex environment, your product too will need to get a little more complex. And on the other side, there is Conway's law, which says that your product design is mirroring your organization's communication structure. So this means that eventually the market structure is kind of influencing your organization structure. So if you have a hierarchical thing here, this might be more fluid, more team of teams, more like overlapping circles of responsibility and things like that. And that is exactly what holacracy talks about, of circles like this. This diagram might look familiar if you have seen diagrams of holacracy. And even if you think holacracy is like a fad, there's still merit in thinking about your org structure in this fashion. And that's what books like team topologies do. And if you look at the product structure itself, I was thinking what this would mean for a software in the software business, right? And that might be microservices that is on the price. Like from the monolith that was the red box, you're going into this microservices architecture. And if you look at this diagram, it should remind you of container shipping. It looks very similar. And then, so it's not a surprise that when we talk about microservices, we talk about containers too, although it means a different thing. It's a similar idea and is enabling the same similar things. And if you look at this particular image, the designers among you probably felt that this is kind of familiar, because I've taken it directly from this classic paper in urban design called "A City is Not a Tree" by Christopher Alexander. This Christopher Alexander, although lesser known, has had a huge influence on the software industry. Like the idea of design patterns and the wiki software idea and all has been directly inspired by Christopher Alexander. And coincidentally, he passed away last Thursday. So with the hat tip to Christopher Alexander, it seems like a great place to end the connection game that we've been playing. And so those are the like frames that you have. If some of them resonate with you, you could keep them in your back pocket and bring it to the talks tomorrow. And try them on for size. And if not, that's okay too, because as I said, it's just some harmless idea app.